We are now live streaming on the YouTube. Welcome everybody, good afternoon. This is the Senate Institutions Committee. Today is April 21st, 2021. I am Joe Benning from Caledonia County, the chair of the committee. We also have with us Senator Mazza from Grand Isle, Senator McCormick from Windsor, Senator Ingalls from Essex Orleans, and I'm expecting Senator Parent from Franklin County at any moment. Witnesses, I cannot remember whether you've been before us before, but I will say the same thing that I've been saying ever since we got onto a Zoom format. We have people in the audience that we just don't know who they are or how many or if they are. But we try to do everything from a 50,000 foot level first in order for people who may be totally unfamiliar with the process in being able to explain to them from scratch who we are and why we are here. Overall, we are obviously talking about the capital bill, and the committee has been working trying to get the bill out the door, but there are changes that are inevitably brought before us, and today we're going to deal with one of those potential changes, at least one of those. And the conversation will be such that we will assume people do not know little acronyms that may be talked about. So if you get interrupted while you're testifying and one passes by, it'll only be because I ask you to explain something that I think the public may not be aware of. We have Kristen Klauser from the administration here with us today. We're going to talk about Section 26, as I understand it, and a potential change that may be requested for that. Committee, I am assuming by now you have received your formal copy in the snail mail of the bill itself. So I am referring now to that document, which this section happens to appear on page 27 of that document. And Kristen, I do understand that you're coming with some proposed language. I don't know whether or not you have that ready to go, but if you do, and we can somehow share it on the screen so the public at large is aware of what you're talking about, that would be most appreciated. And with that, let me say welcome to Senate Institutions, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. For the record, my name is Kristen Klauser. I'm the Deputy Secretary at the Agency of Administration. And like Senator Benning just said, I'm here today to talk about some requested changes in the language of the House version of the Capitol bill at Section 26. I think it might be helpful to just give some brief background and talk about the changes, and then I'm happy to pull up the tracked change version of the language, which illustrates what our proposal is, if that makes sense by way of order.
That'd be great.
Great. So Section 26 in the House version deals with the Capital Projects Fund. The Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund, just by way of background, is a separate and unique fund contained within the American Rescue Plan Act, which people refer to as ARPA. And it provides up to $113 million to the state of Vermont to carry out critical capital projects directly enabling work, education, and health monitoring, including remote options, in response to the public health emergency with respect to COVID-19. The House version of Section 26 has essentially three parts. The first part is intent language, Part A. Part B is designated uses, and Part C is recommendations. We are proposing changes to Part B, designated uses. More specifically, we're requesting that that section be eliminated from the bill in order to maximize flexibility and allow all three branches of government to propose projects to use that $113 million of the Capital Project Fund to be considered in the FY 22-23 Capital Budget Adjustment Act. So I'm happy to bring up the language and dive a bit deeper into what that change looks like, if that makes sense.
I think it
Or
would
if
be
there's
helpful.
questions before that, I'm happy to do that too.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to bring it up on the screen. I see Senator McCormick has a hand up. Senator McCormick.
Yeah, you use the verb to propose. Who would they propose to?
Sure. So section C within, or I'm sorry, part C within section 26, the recommendation language, that requires the executive branch, judicial branch, and legislative branch to propose recommendations to House Corrections and Institutions and this committee for projects to be considered for inclusion in the FY22-23 budget adjustment.
So it's not suggesting that the appropriation function be exercised by the executive branch. It still leaves the appropriation function in the legislature, in the House.
That's correct.
Okay.
So I would say that the designated uses section, the section we're requesting be eliminated, that does not necessarily appropriate any money, but it does designate certain amounts to certain branches with certain proposed uses, thereby, I think, limiting what projects could be proposed to both committees for inclusion in the Budget Adjustment Act, which is the reason we're suggesting it be eliminated.
So could we bring
for
up
now.
that section on the screen?
Sure, and bear with me because I'm used to sharing screens on Teams. I'm not used to sharing screens on Zoom. So my hope is that this will work.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to take more committee time because I don't understand. But I will want more explanation going down the road.
Well, you're going to get that explanation, Dick, in the not too distant future.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. So far, so good.
Okay, great. So this is what I've done is this is the House version of section 26. And what you see in red is my track changes, which is our proposed revisions to section 26. And I'll just walk everyone through it in its entirety. The change right here to part A is minor. What I've done is I've lifted the language from the federal bill. So this is the American Rescue Plan Act language to carry out critical capital projects directly enabling work, education, and health monitoring, including remote options in response to the public health emergency with respect to the coronavirus disease. So I made that minor change just so that the language exactly mimics the language in the federal bill. Right here in section B is the designated uses section. What the House language does is it earmarks $62 million and designates that portion to the Agency of Human Services for mental health and correction infrastructure, and earmarks $51 million for infrastructure within the legislative and judicial branches. We're proposing that entire section be struck in order to maximize flexibility, allowing all three branches to make project proposals with the advantage of seeing the application process and the criteria, and providing both committees the advantage of seeing all of the projects and all of the proposals and being able to prioritize those projects when seeing the whole picture. The recommendation section, former part C, that would now be part B, the only changes I made to this section were to the proposals would be for the Commissioner of Finance and Management to submit recommendations for use of the federal funds by December 15th to the governor. for inclusion in the governor's recommended FY22-23 capital budget adjustment report. Then the Legislative Management Committee and the court administrator would provide recommendations to be by January 15th to the House Committee of Corrections and Institutions and this committee for inclusion of projects within the FY22-23 Capital Budget Adjustment Act. And just for clarity, the reason you'll see infrastructure struck and replaced with capital projects, again, is just to mimic the language within the federal bill.
Okay. Is that the extent of your requested change?
That's right.
Okay. If we can take this down, Becky, if you could bring up the original language on page 28. I'd like to have that in front of us while I respond. Kristen, while Becky is reaching for that, let me back up the train just a little bit and say, logistically, one of the problems that we have is that our committee has had this bill for roughly 3 weeks. I don't even think quite 3 weeks. But we've been tracking the language as it has been developed over on the House side. And we've been taking testimony from basically all the witnesses on the House side as we've been going. This change has been brought up literally on the day I'm hoping to get the bill out of here. So what I'm going to suggest is a little bit different than what you've presented, but I'll pause to say the bill, if it leaves our committee in a way that the administration doesn't like, is still going to have 2 cracks at the apple. One is with appropes, because appropriations is going to have to deal with the bill itself. The other is with the House, if the House gets the bill back and wants to make changes and present those back to us. In order to try to get to some middle ground where everybody is reasonably comfortable, Chair Emmons and I had a conversation this morning about how we could possibly meet some middle ground here to be comfortable and yet leave some flexibility to provide the administration with the idea that we're trying to come to some middle ground. So Becky, I'm not sure if you have the ability to pull that page up yet.
I just chatted Denise. I don't have the ability to share right now.
Okay. Denise, I hope you can hear me and you're working on that.
I'm trying.
I can't wait for the day when we're all back in the State House.
Okay.
I'll bet you the cardiovascular systems of most of us will be much better off when we're back in the building and can actually walk down the hall and do this kind of stuff.
Getting closer.
We'll have all those people making noise out in the hallway between us and appropes.
Right.
Oh, I missed that.
Okay, do you know what page that's on?
It's on page 28.
Okay.
For
Or
the
you can
benefit
just
of-
give, if you can make me a co-host if that's possible too.
Oh, okay.
For the benefit of people at home who may not be familiar with how this all works and have never seen the bill before, I'm attempting to make it very plain and obvious for anybody who's watching what the conversation is that's going on. Senator Mazza.
I don't see where it's a major change. It's, it leaves the same amount of money. 51, I'm just, I don't
Did
want.
you say 28?
Page 28, yes,
Yeah.
top of the page. Assuming your version is the same as what I got in the mail.
I am hoping it is. Oops, wrong way. Share. Share.
There we go.
Okay,
So I do not have everybody on my screen that is participating in this conversation. So if somebody hears something they want to comment on, please just shout out and I'll pause to take your question. You don't want to scroll down any further, Denise. We're going to go right to the top of the page.
okay.
We are now in subsection B. And this would be the 1 and 2 at the top of the page is what the administration is asking to be eliminated, and that's the topic of this conversation. This 113 million has been dealt with by our counterparts in the House for a considerable period of time in trying to figure out what to do with the money and try to keep it directed in a path that enables the legislature to have control over how this money ends up being spent. We recognize there needs to be flexibility for the administration. With respect to section 1, Kristen, what I am able to suggest by way of some compromise is that instead of eliminating the provision, that we keep the amount of money going to the Agency of Human Services with a request that mental health and correctional infrastructure be prioritized in that spending process, as opposed to limiting it to that. That provides some flexibility. So Becky, what I am proposing is that we simply use the word prioritize to adjust that language and make sure it's the legislature's intent to concentrate those monies on mental health and correctional infrastructure unless and until something else is more important, in which case we are obviously going to have a conversation about it, but that would enable the administration to at least make a case in case the money needs to be spent elsewhere. Or if the timing of whatever plans had been for mental health and corrections somehow is different than what we currently anticipate maybe happen. So a tweak to that will be necessary, and I'm going to propose to the committee that for the purpose of getting this bill out the door, that we have that tweaked to enable those two areas to be prioritized, but not have it in concrete that that will be the end result. Secondly, on
Can I ask a
Sure.
clarifying question? So rather than say designated uses in subsection B, just change it to prioritized uses and then say the funds will be prioritized as follows. Does that meet your concern?
Yeah, I'm trying to reach middle ground here, Kristen. So if you see a different way of wording that, I'm happy to try to accommodate. But the basic idea here is that the legislature has made pretty clear its intent thus far that it would like 62 million going to the Agency of Human Services for those two categories, but recognizes in trying to reach some consensus that there may be other needs that need to take priority. But at the moment, if the priority list is not laid out in stone, we want to make sure these two categories are actually at the top of the priority list.
That-
Am I making it,
capital improvements or?
that is for infrastructure purposes, and that's the assumption is it would be capital improvements.
But wasn't the language, it
In,
was,
in fact, we could probably take the word infrastructure, because this is the suggestion I was going to have for the second line as well. You'll see the word infrastructure in both places. Our intention, since this is the capital bill,
capital,
is that these are capital projects. And so changing the word infrastructure in both sections to capital projects is something we would come back at the administration with and say, that's the direction we prefer to go. Our appropriations committee may feel differently for whatever reason it might, but this is the capital bill. We are funding capital projects. The legislature should have control over those capital projects. And so the suggestion here is that in order to accommodate the administration's concerns, we could change the word infrastructure in both sentences to capital projects, and then have the Agency of Human Services just be given a directive that if push comes to shove, our priority is going to be with mental health and correctional infrastructure.
But-
Sure, Senator Mazza.
but why am I taking 62 million and 51 million and not having it like together for their needs as the administration? Why am I sold on 62 million and 52 million or 51 million?
Well, let's put it this way. The body on the other side took considerable testimony on what the needs were coming down the pike. And we have taken some of that testimony. This amount was reserved for that area for those two particular items. And Eric, you can kick in here if you're suggesting that that money doesn't need to be designated or at least prioritized for that purpose. Feel free to let me know, but at the end of the conversation with my counterpart in the House, we would very much prefer to keep this money prioritized for those two entities, if at all possible. The decision to simply eliminate these two clauses puts 113 million really up in the air to be spent in any way. And after all the testimony that's been given to these two legislative bodies, that's just not fair at the last minute to up and say we're going to have that change.
Kristen, what is your response to that?
So I apologize because my internet just dropped out. And so I did not hear the last probably 3 minutes of the conversation.
Oh, that's, yeah.
I do have, I don't know if this will address that, but I do have some general comments and reactions to the proposal if now's the time.
Sure.
So I appreciate the changes. I think it is a step in the right direction. I don't think it addresses all of our concerns because without the benefit of the application process and guidance, any limits that we put on prospective uses of these funds, I think could hinder our ability to apply and receive all $113 million. And even just designating 62 million to the Agency of Human Services and 51 million to the legislative and judicial branches, even for capital projects, I think that unnecessarily limits what the uses could be with the benefit of guidance. And to your point, Senator Benning, with respect to the legislature should be the entity who is prioritizing and deciding how this money is best used. With our changes, the legislature is that entity because the recommendations for projects are provided to the House Committee on Corrections and Institutions and the Senate Institutions Committee. Those are the committees that ultimately decides what projects should be included in the BAA. And therefore that control, regardless of these buckets, and that ability to prioritize is still there within our changes. But what our changes allow are all three branches of government to propose the best and what in their opinion is the best, wisest, and most appropriate use within the criteria that we are yet to receive for this money. And so limiting that ability for any branch in any way at this point seems unnecessary and limits, I think, the committees and the legislature's ability to see the whole picture next year and to make decisions on the best use of that money when you have all of the projects on the table and not just the projects that the legislature or judicial branch can fit within that $51 million allotment, as an example.
Kristen, what do you say to the possibility that this money would suddenly disappear from the capital budget and be spent elsewhere, and then we are looking again for money to try to address the problems that were of concern in this particular category?
So this money is a separate piece. It's a unique and separate fund within the American Rescue Plan Act.
Right.
Unlike the water and sewer infrastructure eligible uses contained within the State Fiscal Recovery Act and the Local Fiscal Recovery Act, this is a unique pot of money that is set aside specifically for critical capital projects. And so I think the administration feels like it makes sense to address this as a separate and unique category within the capital bill.
I guess the concern is that the money would suddenly disappear in a way that we had no control over it. And that is of concern. I'm going to have to look to the rest of the committee at this late date to figure out what people want to do here. But I will say again that you have, as I see it, two additional cracks at this, one with appropriations and one at the House. But I am very concerned that without the ability of having the time necessary to flesh this out, trying to adjust this much money on the fly leaves me very concerned as a chair.
So I think the money is still there because the intent section would remain, and the section with respect to recommendations and how those recommendations are received and dealt with remains. The only thing that we are suggesting to take out is prior to guidance and application and prior to formulating those recommendations, earmarking where that 113 goes within the three branches of government. But I don't believe that removing that language would somehow take it out of the capital bill, because the intent language and the recommendation language would remain.
Senator Benning, can I
Sure, go ahead.
make a comment? So the intent language is, so I think that's a question if you would accept the changes, but the original intent language made it clear that the money would be divided between the three branches of government, and this language is taking out that that specification. So it's not making that clear, that it's just saying that it'd be used for capital projects generally. And I think that what has been said is correct, that ultimately the legislature through the capital bill will decide how these funds are used. One
No, no.
point I would like to make is that
That's this
if you
monster.
have,
Becky, let me just interrupt you. Cubby, could you
Wanna
mute
see
yourself?
Wait a minute, another problem here.
We'll have Denise mute him.
Here's Lucy's rabbit that doesn't leave Lucy alone. Sits in a chair and the rabbit, he's
Becky,
the rabbit.
I mean Denise, could you,
Oh.
thank you. They've been muted. All right.
sorry, my thought that I was gonna say was
Yeah,
that
well,
I think one consideration for leaving in the or the priority uses, however you want to phrase it,
yep.
is that if
That's a
if
barn
each
there,
branch of
Bill.
government is coming
The
back
silver
with,
swimming pool.
Let me stop you
This
again.
was the walk around
Cubby.
right here, what walked
Hey,
around
Cubby,
the pool. And
If
I
you're
put it
listening to me,
overhang,
could you mute
and there's
yourself,
another
please?
door like this over here for the horse. Oh,
That
yeah.
is really nice.
Denise, do
Yeah,
you have
I
the
did
power
this.
to,
I do, but, and I thought I
Cubby
That's the
did.
Smith,
camper.
would you please
We
mute
bought.
your camera,
Oh,
please?
really?
Yeah, we're hoping to use it.
I forget
Yeah.
who's
Are you
with
bringing
Cubby.
it to me or
Somebody's
Yeah.
not listening.
traveling in it? With it?
Yeah, this is what I did at Lucy's this last weekend, or the last time I was there. I talked stuff for washer and dryer.
Oh,
perhaps
Nice.
Denise could
Finished
remove
it.
him
Mike,
from the
I'm
meeting for
online and
now.
I'm
Denise,
Put in a floor.
I'm muted somehow. I
Did that.
unmuted
So
it, but
one more
I don't know
room
what
left
else
to
to
do.
do.
oh my.
No, they all
We're gonna
finished.
mute it.
What's up?
thank you. All right, Denise, Rebecca, you were explaining the legal ramifications here, and I want to make sure the committee is
Oh
very
yeah,
clear.
so one consideration would be that in C, oh sorry, the new B, the recommendations, you're having each branch of government come back through their relevant entity with some recommendations for how to use the money in the budget adjustment process.
Right.
So if you do not designate certain amounts of money or prioritize how, those amounts of monies, I think you could have a situation where all three branches are suggesting $113 million worth of projects for each branch. So I think that's just a consideration for how you want to review those recommendations next year. Because you might have it that 113 million is spent 3 times over. And then, that would be up to the committees next year to figure out how to prioritize those projects. And, if you know you're not going to spend 113 million on, 1 or 2 projects, then it might be hard to allocate that money if one of the recommendations is a project that's $113 million. So that's just a consideration for having the priorities.
So I'm going to come back to this statement. Our counterparts in the House have had a considerable period of time to make decisions about how this money should be allocated within the capital bill. And I understand and appreciate the administration's wanting to be flexible, but I am concerned that we are tossing out, I don't know how many weeks worth of work that has been done to get to this point in order to essentially erase what has been done and do it on the faith that everybody's going to play nice in the sandbox at the end of the day. My concern here is that I want to be flexible as possible. I'm willing to put some language in to make a couple of tweaks to make it clearer and to, at least with respect to the 62 million especially, give the Agency of Human Services some flexibility in how it responds, and yet keep that mental health and correctional infrastructure or capital projects, if you will, as part of this equation. Because I'm very much concerned that trying to adjust all this on the fly without any testimony is very, very concerning to me. Committee, I'm going to look to the 4 of you to tell me exactly what you want to do here, but my personal preference would be we take the word infrastructure in both instances and we change it to capital projects to make that clear. And that we also ask that the human services prioritize mental health and correctional capital projects as it goes forward, but that will not limit them completely if they have something that is much more pressing. I think that's as far as I personally am willing to take it. I believe that our counterparts in the House will accept those changes. And if there is to be more discussion about it, our Appropriations Committee is going to have a chance to take a second look and make decisions. And they, of course, have the ability to override us. But the state of where we are right now leaves me very uncomfortable just eliminating this language altogether. Having said that, that's my rant. Committee, I'm willing to listen to the four of you to talk about what you want to do.
I don't feel comfortable accepting the language from the House because we haven't had time to discuss it. So I mean, it's unfortunate, but on the other hand, if there's a question on that, going along with a 62 and a 51, I don't have any more knowledge. That's a good idea than a bad idea. So
yeah, can we take down the screen share? Whoever that's, whoever's got that.
So I'd rather see it together, but that's my opinion. I don't think I'm qualified to go along with the House at this time if I don't know the complete details.
Corey, Russ, Dick McCormick, wherever you are. Dick's got his hand up.
Yeah, I'm here.
We don't see his face.
I'm here.
We don't see your face.
I know. I'm indisposed at the moment. My thought is, and I haven't really mastered the details of the implications of the actual language as you're subscribing. My concern is that I don't want to be giving away the legislature's appropriation power. And it's not out of hostility to the administration, is that I don't think we should be doing that. That's all. So are your changes, Mr. Chairman, do you think are your changes preserve our constitutional responsibility as the guardians of the fisc?
Well, I'll let Becky ultimately answer the question, but from my own observation, what I've suggested as a change doesn't give it away. It's sort of, I guess, modifying our specific direction into making it a priority as opposed to a specific direction on the first provision. But I don't necessarily see that as giving away the power. It's ceding some flexibility if there is a good case to be made for that flexibility. And Becky, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't see either language, whether you're saying designated uses or prioritize uses, as giving away the legislature's authority to appropriate money. That's, the constitutional authority for the legislature. And this is just asking for recommendations. So they're saying, here's X amount of money for X purpose, come back to us and recommend how you'd like to use it next year. But ultimately the legislature will appropriate that money next year in the capital budget adjustment process. This language is not allowing anyone to appropriate it. And of course, you could have a situation, as you do with the capital budget request every year, where they come back with some recommendations, and then you say, we don't want to do that, and you decide to do something else. So it's just a very similar process to what I think you would get normally in the governor's proposed capital budget request. You're just saying, for this amount of money, focus on this area.
Does that answer your
Well, that's
question?
the clarification I need. Thank you, Becky.
And Chair Benning,
Yep.
the language that you're proposing, it sounds, and correct me if I'm wrong, as you will, you've okayed that with the House? They would agree to that language?
That is correct.
Oh, we haven't made any changes. Sure, they're gonna agree. What do we do? Nothing. All we did was change it to capital project. Is that correct?
We're taking, well, we're
Yeah.
giving priority as opposed to saying specifically in the first instance that it will be spent on mental health and corrections projects. We're going to call that, our wish is that they take priority over anything else the Agency of Human Services wants to do. The other part of that is just changing the word infrastructure to capital projects to make that clear.
But that's in the bill now from the came from the House. That's their language now.
Well, it doesn't say prioritize. It actually does specifically say it shall be
Right.
for
Right.
mental health and
Right.
Yeah.
So they're going to agree with it because that's their language, basically. I don't know what's the difference.
My
Go ahead.
natural inclination is to support the administration versus a House position. But I don't really know enough to come off of that personally.
Well, I'm not
And
sure
then-
where that leaves us.
And the administration wants the flexibility to use these funds to just be flexible, to use these funds, correct? That's why we're changing the language. That's why what we're here for.
So yes, taking out the designated buckets would give all three branches maximum flexibility in what projects they could propose for consideration and potential inclusion in the Budget Adjustment Act. It would also, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here, so feel free to stop me if I do, but I think the flexibility is also important with respect to the application process that these funds fall into. And what I mean by that is the other portions of the American Rescue Plan Act, the State Fiscal Recovery Act, the Local Fiscal Recovery Act, those are certification processes, meaning the administration certifies that the state intends to receive these funds and use them, and the funds are received by the state, and the state has discretion in how to use those funds. The Capital Projects Fund, this $113 million, is a unique fund of money. It's also unique in that it is an application process. And what that requires is an application by the state for specific projects in order to receive funds. So what we don't know is what that application process looks like and what the criteria for the use of funds will be. So the flexibility in not having designations within this language not only gives all three branches the ability to propose whatever projects they believe should be proposed, right? The best use of whatever those projects are, but it also allows the state to apply for any projects with the benefit of receiving the guidance and application process. So the flexibility will help both in the application process, but also to provide projects and kind of a broader scope of here are all the projects that we would like to use these funds for all three branches of government. What's the best use of that money?
So Kristen, how do
Mr.
you,
Chair-
how do you
sorry.
react to Becky's thought that all three branches could say, we want to spend 113 million on our projects?
I think they could do that. It's very similar to what we have now with the capital bill, in that, typically, for example, when you look at the governor's recommended capital bill, the department requests column has about $100 million more than what the governor's recommended column has. And so Rebecca's point is spot on. Allowing everyone to propose uses for these funds could allow both the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the executive branch to propose uses for all 113. But then the legislature would be able to, specifically your committee and the House Committee on Corrections and Institutions, would be able to see all of those proposed projects and determine which projects are the best use of this money and in what amounts.
Becky, you want to respond?
Yeah, I actually just I have some concerns now about the application process that was just mentioned, because to me, this sounds like there would be an ability to apply before the money is appropriated next year. And I do think that that raises some concerns with the separation of powers issue that was just addressed. So I don't really think, unless I'm misunderstanding, I don't think the application issue really is an issue until after money is appropriated next year in the capital bill, in which case that aspect of it shouldn't matter in this process. If there is some contemplation that there be an application of funds before the capital budget adjustment process, and I think that raises some concerns that the legislature would be allowing the executive branch to apply for the use of money before that money is appropriated. So I don't know the timing on that, but I would just raise that as a concern, that my understanding was that there would be no application of funds until, you all decide how to use those funds.
So that's right, in that while we don't have guidance on what the application process will look like, we assume that the application process will be project specific. And so until we have the legislature's approval of a project to go forward, there couldn't be an application for that project.
Senator Mazen.
Tomorrow's Friday. I don't know. I know we'd like to get the bill out today.
It might be over in Grand Isle, but the rest of us, tomorrow's Thursday.
Tomorrow's Thursday. Okay, tomorrow's Thursday. I lost a day this week. One more day. They got the transportation bill. It seems to me there's a lot of uncertainty on both sides of this. I would suggest that we'd get this ironed out this evening or something before tomorrow, because there's no sense of coming out of a committee with a split vote. Why don't we come to some better consensus? And because we had no information on this section, and I'm uncomfortable about voting for something that I'm just learning about today. So I would postpone this particular item until tomorrow, and we have more information and we can make more sense out of it. I think both sides got some good valid points, but just to pass it because the House wants it, I'm not comfortable with that.
Well, I'm not sure who else would be party to the conversation at this stage, but it seems to me it boils down to one of two things. Either we're going to leave the language as the House sent it over to us, or we're going to adopt the language that the administration has just sent us. Is there anybody else you can think of that we ought to be hearing from to resolve this bone of contention?
Well, there's got to be some consensus on both sides of this one, because I'm not knowledgeable on either side right now. And for me to vote for something just because the House has adopted it, I feel uncomfortable about that. But I mean, fine, if you got the votes, let's go for it. But I hate to see an important issue like this. You're talking about 113 million, and maybe it doesn't have any effect one way or the other, but
How are you?
have a clear indication.
Oh, geez.
Denise, could you block Cubby again? He seems to be.
Yeah, I'm in Essex.
I want to block his money.
Corporations again.
You mute yourself, Cubby?
Yes, I'm sorry.
We're both, but anyway,
I wouldn't plan on bringing that.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, could
We
you,
don't want to hear you. That's
Oh,
what
I'm sorry.
please mute,
I was thinking.
please mute yourself, Cubby.
Monday.
Yeah, next week is fine. If you want to plan on Monday, that's
Yeah.
fine.
I think we'll plan on.
Denise, can you mute him?
Oh my God.
Yeah, should be clear by then.
Yeah, okay. I'll leave a message or call I leave a message anyway when I leave. so.
Cubby, whoever else is talking in your room, could you ask them to stop? while we're
Yes,
talking?
yes, just a minute, Bobby, you've got to be quiet.
Okay.
Just,
All right, good luck.
okay.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
Somehow or other, you guys got to learn your mute button because you're dominating the conversation.
I'm sorry.
That was Chris.
Okay,
Well, I can still hear you. There's a little button on your screen somewhere that tells you to press on your microphone button that should mute you. There you go. Thank you. Committee, Eric, Catherine, please weigh in. Dick McCormick.
Thanks. I respect the time concern here. But I share Senator Maz's, I don't feel like I'm standing on really solid ground. I wonder, Rebecca, are you still here? No, I guess not.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, there you are. Would you be able to further research and maybe get back to us tomorrow on the question of separation of powers? Because the word flexibility, I understand the desire for flexibility, but that can be a scary word. The flexibility means giving people decision-making power that they're actually not supposed to have.
Yeah,
They have
so
the power to recommend, but not to decide.
I actually I don't see that there is a separation of powers issue here. I mean, it's clear that this language is asking all three branches to come back with recommendations, and you use this process in many other contexts in the capital bill, as I mentioned, with the governor's capital budget request. The Clean Water Board does this with the Clean Water section every year. They just come back with recommended projects, and then you all decide how to appropriate the money.
Yeah.
The one concern I had was just understanding the point, just to make sure that, I mean, I think one sort of safeguard with the priority uses is that it makes it such that nobody would be applying for money before you all come back next year.
Yeah. Okay. No, the way I've taught this is that the administrators are the experts, not the legislators. You know, I joke, I say my qualification for office is having played guitar at half the weddings in Windsor County. But we do derive our just powers from the consent of the governed, and the experts do not. So it's our job to listen very carefully to you, or to the administrators, and to, all else being equal, do what they recommend. But it is still that their function is recommending, not deciding. And again, when we decide, we should defer heavily to them. But it's still ultimately, we make the choice, they recommend, with the great weight that their recommendations carry. And I just want to make sure that the flexibility we're giving does not go beyond. Right. And I understand.
So I think the only
new language to me is all.
The only concern with the flexibility in this language, I don't think there's any concern whether you say it's a designated use or a priority use. I don't, that it gives them a little more flexibility to say, if it doesn't work out that we can do a project with X dollars for mental health or correctional capital projects, then our second priority would be this, and this is how we would spend the money. This is our recommendation on how we would spend it, and that would come back to you in that way. So I don't think there's an issue with that kind of flexibility. I think if you don't specify that the legislature and the judiciary can also make recommendations, you might be losing out on the flexibility in terms of those two branches of government being able to recommend projects for the amount and the type of projects that they would like to prioritize. But that's where I think the legislative and judicial branches could potentially be losing out in terms of flexibility
If we
you
don't
don't-
pass the fund. Yeah,
if you
okay.
don't say, those two branches can also prioritize how they want to use the money.
Okay, thanks.
Because I'm just imagining that the executive branch is not going to be recommending, I'm just assuming that they're not going to be recommending that the legislature gets $80 million to do a project and vice versa.
Mr. Chair, why don't you and Alice, the chair, and administration, the three of you, get together and resolve this thing by tomorrow, or we don't resolve it?
Could be easier said than done, Dick.
Okay.
That's Alice and I had that conversation. I was offering language that matched Alice's and my thoughts, but
All right, go ahead. Get the members of the committee. You got other members that haven't spoken, so.
well, yeah, I'd like to hear from them. So Corey, Russ, what do you want to do here? Catherine, I don't know whether you want to chip in, Eric?
Sure. I think I was going to say, I think the House's concern was exactly Becky's last point, making sure that the legislature and the judiciary both are considered in this funding. I know you all have also this whole agenda plan for this afternoon. Would it make sense to try to, I don't know what the other House, what Representative Edmonds has planned for the afternoon, but we could, whatever makes sense for you, Senator Benning.
Kristen, have you sent your language to Alice Emmons yet?
I have.
Have you spoken to her about your language?
I have.
And did she give you a reaction of any kind?
She did. I think her reaction is consistent with your conversations. She was, I don't want to speak for her certainly, but she seemed open to the idea of taking away the designation, making it a priority, taking away Agency of Human Services but keeping buckets, 62 million to the executive and 51 million to the judicial and legislative branches, with a priority within the 62 million of mental health and correctional capital projects. That is my understanding of her preferred language.
Okay. Corey and Russ, you guys are up.
I would say that I would love to have you get together with Alice and administration and come back to us tomorrow and say, we've hammered it out. This is my recommendation for the committee, and I think it's a good one. Boom. And that's what I'd like to see. I don't know that we're going to solve anything here today, going around and around with all the players aren't in the room together.
Corey?
I'd say, I'm kind of in a similar boat where I think Senator Mazza and McCormick are just, I don't think I have enough information to feel confident one way or the other. And if we were to vote on it today, you'd get my gut reaction, which again would be to side with what the administration wanted versus the House. So I think taking a day to try to get a little more structure there would make me feel better.
Time is 2:40 almost. Kristen, I don't know what your schedule is like for the rest of the day. I have no idea what Alice Emmons' schedule is like for the rest of the day. I'm going to make myself available for the rest of the day, including this evening. And if Denise is trying to run this meeting. I don't know whether Catherine, you might be able to help facilitate a Zoom meeting between the three of us to try to hammer this out.
I can do that.
Just assume that my time is flexible. I'll meet whenever anybody else is able to be there, and we will try to do just that.
And you can do the same with my time. I will make myself available.
Okay, thank you. All right, and Senator,
I would prefer to do it with a Zoom meeting though, so we can pull up language and make comparisons.
that's not a problem, and I have an account. Okay, and how late do you think you're going in committee?
That's a good question, and I don't know the answer.
Okay,
But if you tell me that you're ready at any point in time, I think I can turn the conversation for the committee purposes over to Dick McCormick and let him take it on from there if we're not done.
okay, all right.
Okay.
And, shall I text? Okay, I'll email you if there, is that the best way to contact you? Okay.
Yep. Okay, Kristen, thanks for coming. We're gonna see you, I guess, a little bit later on, and we'll try to pick up things after that.
Thank you very much for having me.
If you could, though, make arrangements to be with us again tomorrow, just in case this requires you to come back and help explain.
I'm happy to do that.
Okay. Thanks for coming. We're going to change topics if I can find my schedule for today's event, which I seem to have lost, Denise.
Chris Bray next, I think.
Is he on the line? I
Chris
didn't see
Bray
his name.
and Michael O'Grady.
Well, Michael's not coming because
Okay,
we had him yesterday.
so you got Chris Bray next on there. And after that is Barry.
Okay,
Okay.
I'll send an email. Okay.
I don't know what I did with my schedule.
2:00 was the ferry. Laura, Art Cohen, and Jonathan Eddy.
You want
So
to do
while we're waiting for Chris Bray to come, I guess we can accommodate the rest of these guys who are actually here.
Yep.
Cubby, you and Bob are here. I'm going to now ask if you figured out how to unmute yourself.
Oh, please.
Okay. I did.
We're here.
So the reason we wanted to bring you back is just to let you know, when we got the bill from the House, they didn't have any money for you. We wanted you guys to know that we managed to find money for you and put back in 50,000. So we're going to spread that out over 2 years. But watch those guys in the House, because they may try to pull tricks at the last minute. And at the moment, you got the money back. So I wanted you to hear that from us first.
Yeah.
And if you had any questions, now would be a great time.
Well, God bless you. I'm going to turn you over to Bobby. I'm going to let Bob talk with you, okay? Senator Benny.
Okay.
Thank you. I really appreciate you guys.
Can you turn that up a little? All right, I'm here.
Bob, did you hear what I just told Cubby?
Yes.
Okay. I should also have told you that Senator Mazza tried to get you an extra 100,000, but he was unsuccessful in doing that. The rest of the committee beat him down.
Well, I think our plan was the pandemic, to let you know, and I'm sure you've heard this from everybody, but this COVID thing is put a stop to what our plans were. We are not able to generate the money that we should be able to. We've rescheduled like our banquet and done things. So that's hurt our plans. But the 25,000, we can stick with that. We can live with that. The project we want to do to finish the work at Grand Isle, Ed Weed Hatchery, would cost us $58,000. So our plan was, if we got a 2-year appropriation for 25,000 and got approved for that, then we'd come up with the rest of the money to complete that. And what it is, the money would go to it would go to put in 4 more self-cleaning tanks. And these self-cleaning tanks, it's just that's the way they are right now is a real labor intense.
Our guys at Ball Hill Hatchery and at Ed Weed, I'll tell you, these guys are dedicated to their jobs. They're there in the middle of the night. They babysit these fish. But anyway, that was our plan, to put in four more self-cleaning tanks, which would replace the old ones. We would put in a drum filter. The drum filters are around $10,000, and we have to really have them. And it makes EPA happy. And we have to have a UV system, and that's about 10,000. Probably they've come up a little, but we've rescheduled our banquet. We're hoping we can get back on track by April of next year. And the 25,000, it's going to take us 2 years to do this, but we haven't really lost a beat, because the program is still running. We're hatching. Last year, the last 2 years, we've stocked about 270,000 fingerlings in the lake. And the intensive culture is the way to go. I mean, we're growing fish that are 2 inches long in 4 weeks, and it was taking us 7 weeks to get 1.5-inch fish out of our ponds. So, we've come a long way in 15 years. And it's amazing how these fish are surviving. Our program is working this year. We can't be physically involved because of the pandemic, and the guys are taking up the slack. They're getting help wherever they can get it with state employees. And so we haven't lost a beat. We've got eggs in the jars. We've got, I think it was 45. We've got 45, 23 females, 45 males, and probably 40 OTC. That's marked to check for our marks on the fish. So we haven't missed a beat on our program. It's just we haven't been able to do financially the things we wanted to do.
Okay, Bob, I'm going to have to sort of cut you short. By the time we get back to the legislature, we should all be masters of the Zoom format. And hopefully next time when you guys come back, we're not just looking at the top of your hats.
Yeah, but
I was almost falling out of my chair when you said this money is all going to Grand Isle.
Right, but I don't know what's going to happen, because probably by the time we do get used to this, you guys are going to be fed up with us.
Well, don't tell anybody we got you this money and it's all going to Grand Isle, because I'm never going to hear the end of it from the house.
Put the hatchery in your county, we'll give it to you.
Yeah,
I definitely won't. But anyway,
you had a great article. Well, it wasn't you guys necessarily, but the walleye story. We had a great segment on Channel 3 News not too long ago. It was well timed for the purpose of us getting you your money back. Just so you know.
right. Well, we have, we've put, I think, in intensive culture, we've put I have to grab my notes because I got 106,000. I got real accurate figures, but we've put in to Ed Weed and Bald Hill Hatchery, we've put $103,547 into expansion and to upgrade. And Bald Hill is done. They have fish in jars. And we're gonna be stocking like Salem Lake. We're going to be stocking Island Pond, Chittenden Reservoir. We keep expanding little by little as with our inland fishery. So we've really been doing a lot, and we've done a lot with basically little money. And
For you guys. Well,
We-
keep it up. I got to get to the rest of these witnesses for the rest of our afternoon schedule. But next time, hopefully we'll all get back together. It'll be in person.
I'm going to drop those hats off too with Senator Maz at the store, okay?
Good,
Yeah,
all right.
okay.
I can sell them to the committee members.
Yeah,
he's,
that's what it'll do too.
I think I saw him in his store for sale. But
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for coming by.
Okay.
I'm glad it worked out for you.
look, thanks for,
Thank
you
you.
know, thank you for helping us out. It's,
Welcome.
this program is really working and you will never regret it.
Keep fishing.
Thanks a
Okay.
lot. Thank you.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
day.
Jesus Christ.
I'm going to turn now to our next conversation. I hear Denise in the background. I'm assuming, Denise, you're not now telling us that there's something else going on I need to worry about, and you just accidentally left your mute button off.
I did, and I'm in the,
Now she's turned it back on. So anyway,
What a day.
what a day is right.
Phew.
Laura Treishman, Art Cohen, Jonathan Eddy, John T. You guys are up next. I wanted to let you know and have you come back just to dance in celebration and let you know how we did it. First off, the way the bill came over to us from the House had language in there that prevented the Adirondack from being sunk. And essentially, that was a big red flag for me for a couple of reasons. Number one, you guys were not asking for money from the capital bill. And number two, it was really almost outside of our jurisdiction to have something like that placed in the capital bill. But suffice to say that one of the things you mentioned, Laura, was that there were actually rules being worked on in order to take care of this question, should any other future projects be proposed. I have learned since that language has been proposed from our Natural Resources Committee that would require the Department of Environmental Conservation to actually produce rules by a given date so that they could be reviewed by the legislature. So that any future projects regarding Lake Champlain would be subject to stringent rules and requirements going forward. One of the things that the chair of the House committee wanted to have happen was that the additional $10,000 that you folks were given for the setup of 3 additional sites, they put that language into the bill because they wanted to appease you, I guess is the word to use, for not being able to sink the Adirondack. We managed to find the money elsewhere. So right now you still have that money in the queue. But I thought it would be important to bring you all back in here in case the conversation continues, assuming we get this through the Senate. The conversation might be picked up again on the other side of the building, in which case you all might want to be back on their doorstep asking to talk about what changes they might be bringing up. Personally, I like the idea of you having that extra 10,000, doing what you want to do to open up those additional 3 sites, and keeping that in the bill to me was important. But I don't know that that sense of importance rises to the same level on the other side of the building. So to give you the heads up, you have, from our perspective, the language that prevented you from sinking the Adirondack is being removed from the bill. You've got the permits required to go forward. I don't know what else could possibly stop you at this point unless somebody appealed those permits. And I don't know whether they're going to do that. As best as I can figure, probably not. But if this goes back to the House, and it will, I would just be on top of that conversation. Art Cohen, for what it's worth, your name has now been spread to the Senate anyway as being the foremost authority on Lake Champlain. I'm just telling you that in case anybody asks, what do you know about Lake Champlain? You'll know in advance how to answer that question. But for the rest of you, John, I appreciate the fact that you've spent quite a bit of time working energy in this project. Hang on a minute. My committee assistant is raising her hand and needs to tell me something.
Senator Bray is now waiting in the waiting room.
Oh, please bring him into the conversation.
Okay, great.
The bottom line is I want to congratulate all of you for trying to work so hard on the project. You're welcome to stay for Senator Bray's conversation. He is going to present to us the language that the Natural Resources and Energy Committee has proposed to be added into the bill. I think you'll see and understand why he's making the presentation that he is. And at some point in the future, you all may be subject to those particular rules that get developed, but I thought you might want to witness at least the reason for this is coming into our jurisdiction at the moment. Senator McCormick.
Yeah, I just wanted to say before Senator Bray speaks that this committee has not had the occasion to hear my report on the Natural Resources and Energy Committee. So Chris, you're coming in cold.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Bray, welcome to Senate Institutions.
Thank you, Senator Benning, and everyone who's here. So I'm happy to help us sync back up. First of all, I wanted to start with a thank you for Senator Benning and Senator McCormick trying to keep our two committees in sync on this issue where there's mutual interest in seeing us move forward. And so I think I'll just start with two things. One is when we looked at the issue from a process point of view, there was a permit issued for this project back on March 25th, as I understand it. And we're not in the business of interfering with an issued permit. So other parties could intervene or appeal, whatever, but that's not an interest of our committee. Where our interest is really more, we wanted to understand how the permit got issued, what kind of considerations took place on the way to doing that permit, and then to improve the process going forward. So as we learned about it, we ended up learning that, amongst other things, that the ANR or DEC within Department of Environment Conservation at ANR is using an interim procedure to issue such permits, and it dates back to 1989. So it doesn't have the status of a full rule, and it hasn't been reconsidered or formalized for roughly 30 years. So looking forward, we said, okay, so let's improve the process for future applicants. And so the amendment, have you already walked through the amendment that Mr. O'Grady drafted at our request? Okay. And is he coming in to speak with you about it? I wasn't really set up to do screen share.
Yeah, I was shaking my head no, because I was thinking of something else, but no, he has come through. He has walked through.
Okay, great. So as you know, then we're amending Title 29, Public Properties and Supplies, Chapter 11, Management of Lakes and Ponds. And there's a current Section 410, rulemaking, encroachments on public waters. So that's existing. It just gives them the authority currently to do such a rulemaking. They have not undertaken one. So we take advantage of that and say, given the sort of vagueness with how the process goes forward that we thought we could all do better from the legislative side of things to deliver on our obligation to delegate authority, but with adequate direction on the policy side, so that we weren't avoiding a responsibility that we as legislators own. And then the other thing that comes up by virtue of going through a rulemaking is there'll be a public process that will engage all parties. There's notice and comment. So we thought that that was a better forum for addressing the issues that ought to be considered when encroachments on public waters are considered. So you've already seen it. It tells the Department of Environmental Conservation to do rulemaking, that it commences on or before January 1st of next year, and it concludes by July of next year. And there are two criteria. The first relates to the public good. So waters of the state are held in public trust. So there's a public, when we're allowing things to happen to those public trust waters, there needs to be a public good consideration weighed. It lays out criteria for examination of the public good. And then more specifically triggered by this situation, it also asks the agency, the department, to develop criteria for the creation of artificial reefs or sinking of vessels within the waters of the state in a section 2 or sub 2. And it includes other things that they already issue permits for, including things like private docks, marinas, breakwaters, et cetera, et cetera. So none of those are changes, but we included explicitly sinking things. So the thought was that this will be, we'll all, again, for our committee, we're looking forward, not retrospectively at the permit already issued. And we thought it would be the benefit of everyone to have a public rulemaking that will give us ample time for all the parties to come forward and participate in that. So that's where we were. We actually ran out of time in the back and forth this morning on it. So we unfortunately weren't able to I can't report out a committee vote on it, and I can't speak for the full committee, but my sense is that the committee was generally supportive, but we will take it up and formalize our position as soon as we can get Mr. O'Grady back in committee, which may be either tomorrow or the day after. We're still doing some juggling of schedules. So I think, that's what happened in the committee next door. And we appreciate you spinning this issue off and bringing it to our attention and bringing what I think is a solid fix to address the situation going forward on everyone's behalf.
Chris, can I ask, the language as it's currently written, do you envision tweaks being made? My hope was to try to get the capital bill out this afternoon. That's rapidly going by the wayside, but the bottom line is my intent was to say to the committee at this stage, committee, are you prepared to vote to incorporate that language into the bill? We'll get that amendment taken care of and then deal with the rest of our amendments, but I don't want to jump ahead of where you think you want to be with it.
Well, it's always, it's a great question, and any chair knows don't drive too far out in front of your committee. So let me look to Senator McCormick. My sense is I've checked in informally after we adjourned, and I think the committee is likely to adopt the language that you have in front of us and that we last looked at today. Senator McCormick, you want to prognosticate from your position?
Well, I think that is the likely scenario since we have more time than we thought we had. We had also talked about pulling back, letting institutions pass the bill without our input, and then working in advance that we would give proper notice that we would be doing an amendment and hoping that you would regard it as a friendly amendment. Because the only reason we're holding it back is that we're not ready. But if we have a little more time, then probably we can.
So I would just say that I'm comfortable going either way. As a chair, I can appreciate that you may, well, I shouldn't speculate. I can imagine, though, that you might want to vote this out with it resolved already. And I think the likelihood that this is the language that we would be recommending within the next 24 to 48 hours is right on the money. The bill will go to appropriations, so there's the possibility, if we needed to take any tweak to them, especially with two committees behind it. I'm imagining appropriations being a friendly partner to making any kind of adjustments we might need to, but I'm hopeful that we don't. But I am also thinking always that the more work we do off the floor, the better what we do on the floor. So I'd like to see the bill come to the floor clean from the beginning.
Right.
And just to be clear, the matter of the Adirondack, that I'm not sure if the right metaphor is that boat has left the dock, but that train has left the station.
That boat is sunk.
That's gotta be.
Not yet.
I'm happy to hang around and listen to any other jokes you guys got, but I think I got work to do. Chris, I think what I'd like to do is turn to my committee at this point and say, are you guys all comfortable with adding the language as is, in the hopes that Natural Resources is just going to simply say, yeah, that's exactly what we wanted? Because I'd like to get these amendments taken care of as soon as possible. We've got other things to do before we can get this bill out the door. Anybody object to proceeding in that manner? I don't see anybody stomping on the floor, so I'm going to assume we're good to take.
Senator Benning?
Yes, sir.
For the record, Peter Walk, Commissioner of the DC. I'm sorry I had to drop off for a moment. Actually, my computer died and restarted. I would be interested, I understand you're interested in including the amendment that Mike O'Grady drafted. I thought it might be useful to hear from us that we think the appropriate path is to focus on the issue at hand, which is concern over future reefing of vessels, and to concentrate the amendment there. And that the public trust doctrine that we implement as part of the lake encroachment permitting process is a complex and a fact-specific effort, and the broader effort to define those pieces through rules is much more complicated than simply deriving clear bases for when we would authorize the sinking of a ship. And so we provided testimony this morning in Senator Bray's committee about this topic on the same lines, and felt that we wanted to provide it clearly to you here, that we're not supportive of the amendment as drafted.
Okay. Peter, I do understand that. I want to make something very clear for the public at large and anybody else who may not be clear on this. This amendment has nothing to do at all with the Adirondack. This is a process that's going to be going forward in the event any further proposals are made. Peter, do you believe that DEC is not capable of meeting the intentions of the statute for some reason? If we adopt this into the capital bill and you're required to come up with these rules, are you feeling like you can't meet these objectives?
So it's not a question of whether or not we can meet the objectives so much as during your testimony that I believe you heard from Mike O'Grady around the public trust doctrine, that is a basis of evaluating the overall public good relative to the risk or harm that activity might cause. And it is very much a fact-specific basis. Issues that occur within a lake or pond encroachment have cumulative impacts. So each one builds upon itself. So in the issuance of the permit to sink the Adirondack, we included language that was very clear that this changes the basis for all future consideration, because the public good was considered to be the access to be able to dive at historically significant sites in the underwater preserve. that public good is met by the sinking of the Adirondacks. So the question becomes, how do you then further create, what is the argument for creating further public need around that point? And that's a sort of that evolves. So our point has been that creating a clear set of standards for when we would approve a permit. This is not that type of action, right? There aren't numeric standards for water quality around these. This is in the way you have delegated this authority to us. Have we evaluated the situation and determined that there is significant public interest to approve it? And that is a sort of it's a cumulative process. It's a fact-specific process, and doesn't, in my mind, doesn't really lend itself well to the criteria as laid out in the proposed amendment. That is what we consider, but it's not, laying out those specific criteria, and that if you meet this, you will then get your permit, is not the way in which the program operates. And
well, as I understand the amendment is requiring DEC to come up with rules about future proposed sinkings, among other things. It is not. Well, it is not. What I need to understand is whether or not you believe the department cannot do that for some reason.
Senator, I don't think it is in keeping with the public trust doctrine. I'm not sure why I'm having such a hard time saying that phrase. We don't think that it is keeping in line with that there would be clearly delineated protocols for each and every instance. Relative to the sinking of future vessels, we are happy to do that analysis and develop standards around what that might look like. That's what we've been clear on. It's the other pieces that really require that fact-specific analysis that we don't think developing hard and fast criteria is the right approach to do it. It limits the ability to analyze cumulative factors and other pieces that are not in line with the historic view of the public trust doctrine.
So, Chris, I don't want to speak for you, and I know what I want to say, so I guess I'll let you speak first.
Well, I appreciate Commissioner Walk's comments. We looked at that chapter, and if you look at a preceding subsection, so we're taking section 410, which is now just a one-liner that says the department may write rules, and we're saying, yes, let's go ahead and write rules, and here's the criteria to be addressed in two parts there that we went through earlier. There is a section 405 that is very, preceding the rulemaking, which creates a legal framework for that rule. And I'll just read a short section from it. So this at 405 is investigation and determination of public good. So in sub B, it says, in determining whether the encroachment will adversely affect the public good, the department shall consider the effect of the proposed encroachment, as well as the potential cumulative effect of existing encroachments on water quality, fish and wildlife habitat, aquatic and shoreline vegetation, navigation, and other recreational and public uses, including fishing and swimming, consistency with natural surroundings, and consistency with municipal shoreland zoning ordinances, any applicable state plans. And then it goes on to say, if you do the investigation, you can issue the permit. So I do think there is a comprehensive, cumulative context in which the rulemaking is proposed to occur, and that it's consistent with our job as policymakers to express ourselves around what the criteria are to be considered. And so so that was part of our discussion in the end, was we have an obligation to articulate policy rather than to leave it implicit in some way. The other piece was that by virtue of going through rulemaking, clearly there's more interest and maybe controversy on this issue than any of us might have guessed ahead of time. And so by virtue of going through the rulemaking, that public notice and comment period allows all parties to come to the table, participate in an orderly process, and come up with a rule that I think will serve all parties better than the current system does. Because there, in the end, the committee ended up concluding that with no action at all, there's no assurance that a year from now, the same situation couldn't happen again with another vessel. And so we thought, okay, let's be explicit about it. It'll put everyone in a better position next time around.
Senator Parent.
I'm struggling with this one, to be honest with you, Senator Benning. I don't like rulemaking in general. I think we do far too much of it. I get the point. There could be another vessel next year, but I've only been around 7 years. It's the first time we're talking about it. I don't know the last time we've actually scuttled a boat in the lake. I think it's that reef in the islands. I'd rather honestly. I think again, like the other issue, I just I don't think we're really taking the time to dig in on this, and I just hate to put more regulation in without really being thoughtful on it. So I'm leaning towards opposing kind of any language along these lines.
Senator Ingalls.
I concur with Senator Parent. I think that this is a broader issue. Obviously, there's more concern about sinking more boats at a later time. I thought that we were pretty much resolved of this as far as the Adirondack in this bill. I don't see why this amendment has any reason to be in this bill. I think that if other agencies want to impact legislation, that next year they should write a bill and take it up and see where it goes. But I'm not in favor of this amendment being in this bill.
Senators Mazza or McCormick?
It's very confusing. I thought this was going to be one shot, one deal.
I thought so too.
So I'm overwhelmed today again. We're back to where we started. I got to listen to Senator McCormick.
Senator McCormick.
Responding to the antipathy to regulations, I mean, essentially, governing is what governments do. It's not to say that we should jump at every chance to govern, but there are decisions that have to be made. And as far as why is this in the bill, is because the House put the issue in the bill and we're taking it out. So our deleting the House language is how we're dealing with the issue that they raised. And this is a response to that, the idea that we are recognizing that the sinking of the Adirondack is as good as a fait accompli. It's going to happen. It's been permitted. But then the question remains, if you think it's fundamentally a bad idea, what are we going to do about that? And I think that's our job.
Senator, if I may offer a compromise, we are fully willing to, able to, happy to go through a public process to develop guidance or rules, whatever is in the committee's preference, relative to the sinking of ships. That is a separate instance of activity under the lake encroachment world that does not come up regularly, has very distinct impacts than what are typically issued in the roughly 40 or so permits we issue statewide annually, that are mostly around shoreline erosion control and other aspects, and marinas and things of that nature. If that is of the committee's interest, we are happy to go through that process and allow the public the opportunity to weigh in on what that would look like. The language that Senator Bray just read speaks to the review that we do now and provides that clarity around what the public trust doctrine means. And it provides us the flexibility to be able to implement that relative to that cumulative impact basis and that individual factual basis. That, from our perspective, is sufficient to implement that program. the only concerns that we've heard relative to that program are about the sinking specifically of this ship, but in general about the sinking of ships. And so we are happy to go through that process specific for that work. We think that that would provide clarity for the community writ large as we go through that work.
So let me offer this observation. I read this language as saying, right now there's a statement in the law that says you may write rules. This proposed amendment requires you to write rules. It may very well be that there are distinctions between the sinking of a ship, the extension of a dock, or the placement of some barrier for water retention purposes. But those questions are yet to be resolved in a rulemaking process for which this committee has no jurisdiction whatsoever. That's something that should be dealt with in natural resources. That's the way that I see it. From the perspective of institutions, we had a bill come to us that had a provision in it that needed to be removed, and we removed it. But in the process of taking testimony in that, we heard specifically from Laura Treichman that there were rules being developed to deal with issues like this moving forward in the future. And I'm not going to speak for you, Laura, but that was the way that I interpreted what was happening. I also understood you to say that, in fact, in previous occasions, people had requested to sink a ship, and decisions were made based on a process that could be interpreted as a rule of thumb at the very least in making the decision as to whether to do that or not. As chair of this committee, however, going back to the opposition in the House that very much wanted to have the Adirondack language in place, we have, I guess, as call it an olive branch to say, we have now given directive to the department to develop rules. I don't see this statute as saying specifically what those rules shall be. There may be a conversation with natural resources in which the department makes a very credible argument that X, Y, or Z components should or should not be included in the rulemaking process. But I see that as being beyond our committee's jurisdiction. Forgive me, I'm in an office on a corner. Hang on a second.
Thought that was you on your bike.
I wish it was. Right now, I wish it was. Even though it's pouring rain out there, I would gladly be on a ride.
If I may, Senator Benning, I would say, speaking briefly for Laura, is that they are developing specific criteria for which they would evaluate the potential sinking of a ship. That is separate and apart from the development, the issuance of a lake encroachment permit under our purview, under the Department of Environmental Conservation purview. So it's a separate issue. Obviously, we are all one government, so we want those things to overlap, but I think they would have to meet first her criteria and then ours. And that's the sort of process that we need to go through. Relative to your point about whether or not a robust conversation should occur, Senate Natural Resources, on what should be included in that amendment, Senator Bray started that conversation today. We didn't get through that conversation. And so that's my request, is that it not be included in your amendment, that the amendment not be included to this point because the conversation isn't resolved.
Well, the problem that I've got in not including that language now is I go back with no olive branch to the other side. And then we end up in a battle internally about whether or not the Adirondack language should come out or not. And I don't want to be backed into that possibility. Right now, the way that I see it, no rules have been developed. There is a desire to have that happen. One component that this committee does have jurisdiction over is the lake bottom itself. any encroachment on that lake bottom falls within our jurisdiction to have conversation about. And I thoroughly support the idea that rules should be developed to deal with encroachment. What kinds of encroachment and how you're going to deal with that, to me, that's a chapter yet to be written, but it's not going to be one written by this committee. Corey.
What if we put language in about a report they have to get back to us about how they're handling this situation next year, and then we can take up legislation at that point? My concern is any rules getting developed by folks without our sign off or without a broader piece is where I think we run into trouble. So give Laura and her team the rest of this year to figure out some things. Peter's team will obviously put some thoughts into it, and we can have notes, and either can go into the capital adjustment bill next year, or Chris's committee can pass a piece of legislation off of what they report to us. That could be the olive branch. I know it's not a typical study, but is there a report that we could ask for that helps us get there? I think people are acting pretty emotionally on this one, and it's gone through a permitting process. And usually my frustration with A&R is how hard it is to get permits through them. I don't think anyone's ever said it's too easy to get a permit through them. So, I think the fact that the Adirondack got their permit shows they probably went through a pretty scrutinous process. So, I'd almost rather see a report than have us make a decision at this time.
Makes sense.
Senator Bray.
So thank you for letting me participate in the discussion, which I appreciate hearing all the points of view. I mean, I think for one of the olive branches is that we all have agreed to separate ourselves from the issue, disentangle ourselves from any notion of interfering with an existing permit, an issued permit. But for anyone who's served on LCAR, like a precise way in which we regulate, I think it's probably some of that LCAR awareness that makes me think that we're always better off being explicit about the rules and the rulemaking, so that both the application process and the public notice and comment is all more explicit. So I understand. I'm a little shocked to hear Senator Parent arguing for a report. I thought he was allergic to reports when he was on our committee, but honestly, the rulemaking itself is such a public process. I don't know how anyone is going to get caught up short in this. And if we were proposing this out of the blue, it'd be one thing, but section 410 that we're amending actually calls for a rulemaking. It's optional in 410, and we're just saying it becomes mandatory. And the reason for making it mandatory, again, and I'll not repeat this anymore, is it just makes it more clear, transparent, explicit. There's nothing punitive about going through a rulemaking from my point of view. It's simply that we let everyone know what the policy is and how you get a permit. So I'll pause there and thank you again for letting me join your committee.
So before you leave, let me just make sure my committee gives me a clear understanding of where we're heading. I've got Senator Ingalls and Senator Parent voting not to add the language. I'm not sure where Senator Mazza is yet.
Where are you, Mr. Chair? Where do you want to go with this?
Well, I'm going to make a suggestion. If the committee is of a frame of mind not to accept the language as written, that I would say to Senator Bray, I suggest that you go back to natural resources, modify your proposed amendment to deal specifically with the sinking of ships. You may have very good reason to get rules established for virtually every other encroachment on the lake. But I'm sensing from my committee right now that getting beyond the ship question could be problematic. And then I'll see if I can't force feed that amendment as friendly to the committee.
Okay, I'm with you then.
Senator McCormick.
I'm with you, boss.
I think if we can narrow it, I'd be willing to go along with that.
Well, if you weren't, you'd be outvoted anyway, if I'm reading my committee correctly.
Wise man.
Chris, I think that's as far as I'm going to be able to take it. And so
Okay.
for the moment, I'm reading my committee as saying that they want to reject the amendment as written. But in the event you pop up with something friendly, since I'm not going to have my capital bill out this afternoon anyway, they've given me marching orders on another subject. You got tomorrow morning to work on something that we can find palatable. And then we'll take it back up again tomorrow afternoon and see if we can reach agreement. And I won't be able to get the bill out until Friday, but c'est la vie.
Okay, so we will, as Commissioner Walk indicated, we were having a conversation, but ran out of time. So such is the nature of this time of year. So we'll.
I see great wisdom in what the commissioner is talking about. And I will say again that from an institution's perspective, it is very important to have rules developed on how you can encroach on the lake bottom. We are dealing right now with ships. That will be a part of that conversation. If that's the only thing I can walk away with from this, and Peter, do you tell me if I'm wrong, if this was specifically limited to developing rules on the sinking of ships, is that something you can live with at the time we go to try to pass this capital bill in?
I think we probably want to think about it as maybe reefing as a whole. There are other former things that have become man-made reefs, such as bridge pieces and things like that, that have become reefs in other places. And so we'd be happy to consider more about the sort of the impact to the lake bottom than the specific of it being a ship.
Reefing is perfectly fine. It's the same thing in my book. And you know, if we can narrow it down to that and make everybody happy, I think we've made some progress. And then I have some piece of an olive branch to walk back to the House committee with and see if we can't get everybody on the same page.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'll take this back to committee. I think, you know, the public trust portion of, you know, of waters of the state was also an important piece of the conversation, but definitely we're not talking about the lake bottom anymore. So we're talking about a public good and a more broad, you know, considerations. So I don't know where the committee will go, but I'm happy to go back, and Senator McCormick will be there as well, so he can help make sure that we remember correctly where institutions stands now, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, I see this fairly simple from institutions' perspective, that reefing is the argument that's in our bill. And you may very well have good reason to want rules to be developed on all other forms of encroachment and water quality, but that's not within our jurisdiction. So keeping it limited to what our jurisdiction is, I think is very important for us to be able to eventually sell the Senate's position on the capital bill overall.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks very
Thanks,
much.
Mr. Chairman.
Good to see you all.
Okay. Thanks, guys. And happy sinking, as they say on the Adirondack.
We wouldn't
Thanks for
want this
coming by.
provision to,
Senator-
we wouldn't want this provision to scuttle your bill, so.
Right.
let's-
Well, we've already been on a 3-hour tour, so.
Think your bill.
right.
Senator McCormick, you have your hand up still.
Yes, I just wanted to respond to a comment that Senator Parent made. I've got to say, I get complaints all the time that A&R is too easy.
Wow. Wow. Who are you talking to?
Yeah.
Citizens, Vermont.
Franklin County,
obviously
we
people
don't
from
make that
Hanover.
argument.
He's talking to people from Hanover.
Yeah, I've never heard anybody say, whew, that was easy. Let's do
All
that
over
again.
the state, all
Right.
over the state of Vermont.
Yeah,
We're
I mean,
gonna
they
talk,
know better than to talk to you, that's all.
that's right, yeah, right.
we're gonna talk logistics, but for now, Denise, if you could take us off of YouTube, we'll end this conversation. Thank you all again for coming.
Thank you.
For the record, I hear all of those complaints on both sides. So.
Oh.